On this week's episode of the Autohaus podcast.
See, you did that. I'm not Mark.
Oh, shit.
Even you did it.
Oh, man.
Even you did it.
Sorry, man.
Yeah. Now I'm feeling nice and loose. See that? Now I'm in my comfort zone. Someone mistook me for my brother. Come on.
This is the Autohaus podcast. I feel like I have a long-time legend in the game right now, and I'm really privileged to be able to finally connect and talk with you. Can you say your name and give yourself a short introduction?
Yeah, my name is Matt PANIC. I drift a 1973 Toyota Celica. I'm on a team called Shah Dynasty, or Shadynasty, some people call it, and I own a company called PANIC Made.
So the premise behind trying to get in touch with you, I saw on Instagram that PANIC Made coming soon. And then first of all, you're still using a flip phone, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking on right now.
Yeah, so how's Instagram work on a flip phone?
Well, I've sort of been shying away from social media my whole life. But, now I have a company, and it's helpful for my company to have an Instagram and let my customers know. But actually, I do it on a computer.
Okay.
And I use a tablet to upload the picture.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I saw PANIC Made coming soon. It looks like the Instagram page is live. And that really piqued my interest, especially seeing your brother, like how big Panic Wire has grown over the years. But before we get into the business side, let's hear a little bit more about you. I want to hear about your driving and drifting history and then your Corolla history. So why don't we get started with Corolla history first? When did you buy your first Corolla, and what was your first Corolla experience?
Okay, so my first Corolla experience was in 2006. I had already been drifting an F13 for a few years, and I guess I got noticed by a company called Drift Office, and they had built an 8.6 for Pro-Am and asked me to be their driver. A lot of my friends had told me over time that, I drove my F13 more like an 8.6 driver than an F13 driver, and that, I should try it out. And they were totally right. From the beginning, as soon as I started driving that 8.6, it felt like much more natural actually than the F13 that I had.
So what aspect in particular about driving the car did people say you're driving this like a 8.6 or a Corolla?
Okay, so when I had my F13, I only focused on upgrading like suspension, LSD, the environment, like a speed steering wheel. And I just stuck with a single cam KA. And when you have a car that only makes like 120 horsepower and you're trying to compete with it, you have to drive as fast as possible and aggressive as possible to keep up with everyone else. So I actually like it better than driving a powerful car. And the 8.6 is sort of like what I already had, but like much lighter. So it even brought out that aspect more for me. Like it felt better for me to drive because I had to try so hard. I mean, I guess I like a challenge, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. One other podcast episode we had with John Yim, who's an ex-Formula D driver, he said something similar. It's like driving a Corolla, you have to put your foot in it all the time or else you're gonna lose.
Yeah, I tell a lot of my friends too, like you can slow down later. Like ideally, especially if you're driving an 8.6, just never slow down. Like stay as fast as you can all the time. And another challenging part of driving an 8.6, and especially one with low power, you can't mess your line up. Like your line has to be good because you can't afford to hit the brakes.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that too. I think that was the other part of what John Yim said was like your foot has to be in it all the time and your line has to be 100% all the time. And that's what makes it so challenging and rewarding at the same time driving this chassis.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you want to like maybe ask me again and go back before I started driving Corollas? Because I got into drifting like probably 5 years before I drove a Corolla.
Okay, awesome. So that's a really big fact. Then you started drifting 5 years before you got a Corolla. So how'd you find out about drifting in the first place?
It's a pretty interesting story. About the year 2000, I was really into this video game that wasn't popular in the U.S. and it was very popular in Japan. So I found my way over there just to play this one video game. It's like the people who were the best in the world at it, right? And at the time, I was pretty young. You know, I was like teenager. So aside from playing video games, you know, I made some friends there. And, you know, what do you do when you're that age, right? They said, hey, man, we can, like, go street racing if you want. And in my mind, it was like back in the U.S., you know, like some high school kids, they want to go out drag racing. Okay, yeah, let's go. I kind of know what this is going to be. So we go out to the mountains. We drove like 2 hours out of Tokyo, go out to the mountains, and I didn't know anything about drifting, never heard of it, never seen it before. And it totally blew my mind. After that, I come back to the U.S., I'm into it. It's really hard to find anything. There wasn't even MySpace yet. Like, there was no way to find anybody. So I just started looking online, you know, and I heard about Initial D, which I'm sure is a big topic on your show. And I actually got some, like, copied VHS tapes. So the whole season was, like, 23 VHS tapes. And that's how I first watched Initial D. So I heard about drifting and saw it in Japan, came home, got into Initial D, and then maybe like 2 years after that, I bought an S13 and started doing it myself.
What was drifting like when you first got your S13? And then was there anyone else drifting at the time around you?
So I was in Washington, which is the closest place to Japan geographically in the U.S. So there was a little bit of sort of influence locally. Like we have a Japanese bookstore in Seattle where I could go and buy like option videos and Drift and Go Through magazine. And, you know, I'd be there and meet someone who was into it too. But at that time, it's like no one had a fully built car and there were no drift events yet. So like maybe we'd meet up in a parking lot somewhere and, you know, do donuts together, like little second gear drifting. And one guy would have like a bucket seat with stock suspension, and one guy would have coilovers, and one guy would have a body kit. So it was very like people were trying and working with what they had, and it was really hard to get JDM parts. But there were, like I said, there were no events, and it was very loose, like on the street. But all of us were kind of nerds about, you know, Initial D, that kind of thing. So we had like street teams.
We had a conversation before this podcast, but it's really interesting. The more I hear you talk about the Northwest, like the more I find out. And having this Japanese culture aspect in the Northwest is really intriguing for me. It makes a lot of sense, like connecting all the dots, like why the Northwest seems to be like the mecca for drifting for classic Toyota. And the culture is still really strong there. And all these little dots I'm piecing together from what you're telling me, it's kind of coming together.
Okay, yeah. And, you know, I'm going to give you like a local legend around that. So I'm sure that, you know, especially old Toyotas, you know, I drift 70s cars. My team drifts 70s Toyotas. There are tons of 86s up in the Northwest. And there's sort of a local legend around there that back in the 60s when Toyota wanted to bring cars over here, because Seattle is the closest, like I mentioned earlier, they wanted to ship them to Port of Seattle, right? But there was no room for them. So the Port of Tacoma is Tacoma's a city a little south of Seattle. They have their own port. It's smaller, but, you know, they take international boats and everything. And Toyota made a deal with them. And from what I've heard, that's the first place that Toyota was able to ship cars to the U.S. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it later. You know, they named a truck after that city, right?
Yeah, I was just about to say, Toyota Tacoma.
Exactly. So yeah, that's sort of, I don't know if it's true. it makes sense to me, and I've heard it from a few different people. But yeah, if you look around up there, I mean, you can go on Craigslist right now and buy 70s Toyotas. Like, they're always on there.
One piece of homework you gave me to do before we did this podcast was to listen to the Tandem podcast, which you also were on. And that's one thing you mentioned, is that in the Northwest, there's probably the highest concentration of Toyotas in the US. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to say vintage Toyotas. I think so. You know, I've traveled around a lot for drifting, and I haven't seen anywhere else that's like the Northwest. Like, we regularly have events where there are more 8.6s than S chassis, and it seems to be the opposite everywhere else I've been.
Yeah, I would agree. Even at drift events nowadays, in California, it's pretty rare to see at least one Corolla out there. Whereas you were telling me you guys have some events where there's more Corollas than S chassis.
Yeah, that's right. And once a year on August 6th, which is 8.6 Day, we'll hold a track day up in Washington and invite, 8.6s and older rear-wheel drive Toyotas. It's called the 8.6 Spirit. And the last time I went was in 2018, and there were over 70 AE 8.6s there, and it was on a Tuesday.
Yeah, 70 is a huge amount already, and then plus being in the middle of the week.
Right. And there were a few show cars there, which we totally appreciate. But I'd say the majority of the 8.6s that were there were on track, like driving and using their cars.
I'm trying to figure out, what is it about the Northwest that makes this so conducive to motorsports and especially drifting? What do you think? What do you think are some points you can that are specific to the Northwest?
Well, we have pretty loose rules around registering cars. There's a rolling 25 years, not just for JDM, but any car. So once your car is 25 years old, you can register it. They don't care anything. Like, you can do anything you want. But it's not like California. You can drive around a car with no panels on it. You can put any engine you want in it, and you're totally free to drive as you please. So I think that definitely helps the popularity of, well, I guess any car that's older than 25.
Your drift team, Shah Dynasty, what city would you guys say you're mainly located out of?
I'm going to say Portland, Oregon.
Portland. And then how many tracks do you guys have around there?
So I would consider Pat's Acres. Most people call it Park, our home track. We have sort of an open layout track called Spirit Peaks Raceway. That's in Washington. I think Evergreen Raceway, where they do Formula D.
Yep.
There's one in Southern Oregon where they do the Bash to the Future event. But, we don't limit ourselves to the Northwest. Like, my team travels, we do all the final bout events. So in the Midwest, I pretty regularly go to California. Right now I reside in Arizona. So, of course, I'm doing all the local events here.
Yeah, talk about that. What's the story behind Shah Dynasty traveling state to state doing these events?
Well, I said we were based out of Portland, but actually we're in Portland. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Paul is in Vancouver. Cody is in Snoqualmie, Washington. And Justin is also in Portland. And we're so used to traveling just to drive together. Like a 5-6 hour drive is very normal for us.
Yeah, because it's not like, so again, to give you some context, we have a former Formula Drift driver. You might know him. Do you remember Jeff Wolfson?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, Jeff Wolfson campaigned a 1J or 2J FRS in FD, and he had to make long trips across the country because he was competing. But it sounds like you guys aren't competing. What is like the reason for going like state to state doing these events?
I mean, I know it sounds like a simple answer, but it's really just for fun because we love doing it. Like, there's no money in it, and in fact, we spend many thousands of dollars and get nothing back except for the experience. We all love driving together. We all have similar styles. Our cars they're all 70s Toyotas.
So before the phone calls, before the podcast, when I asked you about potentially being on the podcast. I know it seems like you got pretty pumped a second there because you sent me like this back-to-back messages and pictures. And one picture in particular was one of your 886s. And you were like, yeah, was my car that I ran in Pro-Am. I was like, wow, I didn't know Matt ran in Pro-Am. So can you talk about Drift Office and your journey in driving Pro-Am?
Yeah, Drift Office approached me to drive their Pro-Am AE86 in 2006. And, I had been competing locally in my S13 and had never driven an 86 before. And it was a natural fit. So, I did some practice days, got used to it, and started competing. And I was doing the Pro-Am thing at Evergreen. And it was a little different back then. You could actually compete with an 8.6 with a 20 valve in it. I mean, that's not really a thing you can do now. And also, Pro-Am wasn't quite as structured as it is now. There wasn't like a hard rule book, and it was sort of a regional kind of thing. Like the rules were a little looser, right? So that allowed me to be competitive in that car. And, I'm thankful for Drift Office and everything they did for me. And it was a really great car. But after 2 years, I started to realize that I wasn't really interested in competition. It's not really like in my blood to win, if that makes sense. And after that, we parted ways and everything's great. We still talk. We're friends. After that, I got my own 8.6 that I bought from a friend of mine that actually helped him build it. So it was a car that I was already built the way that I wanted. And I just started driving for fun. And at that point, Grassroots started doing some things like team competition, where you're, 3, 4, 5 cars, but you're not trying to beat the other guy. You're trying to cooperate with the people around you. And that felt so much more, right to me than trying to be, to be the best of the other person.
It's interesting linking the common themes between people who used to drive Pro-Am or ex-Formula D, specifically you, John Yim, and then Jeff Wolfson, kind of like the same story where it was because it was competition, all of a sudden, what they loved, drifting, became not fun anymore. And then they took a long hiatus of just not driving. And then once they were able to drive for fun again, now they're back into it.
Yeah, and that echoes my story pretty closely, except that I never took a hiatus.
Oh.
So I've been actively drifting since 2003, every year.
Oh, awesome, man!
And I would say that my average is about 20 events per year. Obviously not this year because of COVID. I've only been to the track twice, but I am planning on going back soon.
I think one big factor in people not doing events is the cost of doing events. If you don't mind me asking, how do you budget out the cost to do all these events every year?
Yeah, the way that I build my car is actually a reflection of my budget. I watch all my friends around me. They have, big wheels, big boy tires, big power. And everything gets bigger and it's a little more showy. But I run 15-inch wheels and 15-inch tires are very cheap. And my car is lightweight. So even though everything is smaller, I can still keep up. So my whole program is centered around, saving costs and having as much fun as I can with my friends.
I think that's a really wise way to do it, because as fun as it is to have big flashy wheels or big power, it's every event becomes that much more expensive too.
Yeah, my team drives the final bout event, and I'm sure that we're the only ones running 14 and 15-inch wheels, but we're also the only ones that have, 2,000-pound cars out there. So really, it's kind of a balance, You have a heavier car, you need more power, you need a bigger tire, right? And that gets more expensive. I mean, I just don't have the budget to have a big flashy car, even if I wanted one.
Can you talk about the origins of Shah Dynasty? How did you guys start that?
Yeah, so I bought my current drift car, the Toyota Celica. I bought that in 2010 and started working on it. And I drove it at some events in 2011 at places like PGP, which isn't around anymore, and at Park. And at the time, it had a 20-valve 4AG in it. And over the winter, I decided I wanted to do a beam, which I heard a few people in the U.S. had them, didn't really know much about it. There wasn't a whole lot of information. And a friend of mine who knew what I was doing also knew about some guy in Canada who I had never heard of, who had a mango Corolla, the 72 Corolla, also doing the beam swap, also with ITVs. So I went on a Canadian, drifting forum and found him. He didn't have any, he's even older than me. I found him and messaged him and said, hey, this is like fate, man. Like, you need to come down to the U.S. and we'll go driving at Park. It's the perfect track for a little car with this kind of power. And that's when I met Paul Harrison. He came down he lived in Calgary at the time, so it was like a 2-day drive for him. And yeah, he came down and we drove super well together, did tandem right out the gate, had really good laughs, had a lot of fun together. We're actually really good friends aside from driving well together, and decided we wanted to make a team.
What year would you say like the origin of Shah Dynasty started?
I think it was around the end of 2013. In the beginning, it was just Paul and I, and the first Final Bout event was coming up, and we had heard about it, and we wanted to enter a team. And my twin brother has also been drifting just as long as I have, but at the time he had an X8 Cressida. And it was very different from Paul and I, but we decided to enter Final Bout as a team. We called it Shah Dynasty. Well, I guess there was a team a little before that, but the first time we went out as a team was the first Final Bout event. And we had tons of fun together. Obviously, like, my brother and I drive well together. We're twins, been driving together for years. And after that event, my brother got rid of his X8 Cressida, which he loved, and I'm sure he regrets, and got a 78 Corona, which he drove with us for another 4 years. Just around that same time we did the first Final Bout event, I heard about a guy up in Seattle who was also drifting a 70s Celica like mine. And of course, just like when I met Paul Harrison, I went on a quest to find out who this guy was and absorb him into our team. And that was Cody Berlin, and he's still on our team. One of my best friends now. And then we have one more member on the team, Justin Lucas, who I've actually known for at least 15 years. He was a friend of mine from the Portland drift event when he first started. And he's had various cars over the years, Cressidas, S13. And I asked him, hey, if you're interested in getting a 70s car and you want to be on our team, let's do it. I was living in Portland. Justin was living in Portland. Mark was living in Portland at the time. So he's our newest member, but he's actually, aside from my brother, my oldest friend on the team. He drives a 79 Cressida.
Where did the name Shah Dynasty come from? Who came up with that name?
I came up with it. There's a TV show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and there is an episode where one of the characters' love interest has that exact name. So I didn't make it up. I didn't make the joke of Shadynasty, anything like that. But in the episode, the time period was set like in the 70s when the story was told. So it was funny and it kind of felt right. But yeah, it's a total knockoff from that TV show. Not even going to hide that.
I think a lot of people don't know that you guys are twins, you and Mark. I remember way back, Panic Wire followed me on Instagram and he was like, yeah, man, you're doing, I appreciate what you're doing. Like, I like what you're doing. And I was like, oh yeah, man, I remember you, likewise, I remember you back from the first gen Celica forums. And he was like, no, that's Matt. And I was like, oh wow, there's two of you guys.
Yeah. People confuse us pretty often, and, rightly so. We're both into drifting. We look the same. We sound the same on the phone. Our names are almost the same. But yeah, he's had his wiring company for maybe like 13 years, I think now. He's been doing wiring. And just last year, actually, I decided that I wanted to start making my own parts. I started with my car making axles. I have a Celica Supra rear end, so that was my first product. And
The launch of Panic Made, let's talk about that. What made you decide to launch your own company?
Okay, yeah, about a year ago, just before I moved to Tucson, I decided to start making my own parts for my own car that would like kind of suit my needs and the way I like to drive, and started making axles. So this has been a project for a little while, and I found myself not working because of the whole COVID thing. You know, I'm working on making more products, most notably for your audience, probably 8.6 replacement axles, which as far as I know, you can't buy anywhere. So I was planning on launching the company a few months from now when I had that product ready, but it's sort of like what's going on in the world forced my hand a little bit. So I made a website for my products, got that built, and I was talking with my brother, and he said he'd be interested in sort of co-branding with me and working with me because we have the same customers, you know, 8.6 guys or like old Toyota guys, people who do engine swaps. So it made a lot of sense. You know, everyone thinks I'm him anyway.
So I heard axles. What other parts and services do you plan to offer with Panic Made?
So the ones that I'm designing and testing right now are I'm making every version of the 8.6 GTS axles. So Zenki and Koki, open and LSD versions. Right now, they're currently testing in a Beams car that I have, and they should be ready for sale in about 2 months. You know, everything that I design and sell, I test myself. I run on my own cars. You can see me beating on them as much as I can. You know, there's lots of videos and pictures everywhere.
What I'm interested in knowing is why Celica Supra axles, and then you said you're doing axles for open diff GTS Corolla also?
Yeah, well, okay, first of all, I did the Celica Supra axles first because I have a Celica Supra rear end in my own drift car. I was buying Celica Supra axles and I kept breaking them. So I needed something stronger that could, you know, stand up to what I was using them for. Yeah, my car only makes a little over 200 horsepower to the wheels, but it's also like how you drive it. And, you know, I'm pretty mean to my rear end. And so far, you know, it's been almost a year. I've thoroughly tested my product, and it's now for sale. You know, I have pictures for after 15 events. I pulled the axles, and they're completely straight. The splines are totally perfect. I'm confident saying that they're good for probably 400 horsepower. The 8.6 axles I'm making, they are made out of the same alloy that I came up with for the Celica Supra axles. So not only will they be a direct replacement for any version of the AE86 axle, pops right in, they're going to be about 150% stronger, and they're designed with the beam swap in mind. A problem that a lot of Beams guys have is, you know, the 8.6 rear end is good, the GTS rear end, but the axles are the weak point. And that's exactly what this product is addressing.
You made one good point that it's not particularly horsepower that breaks parts. Especially in drifting, I know it's the repeated shock loading is probably what snaps parts. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, there's a big difference between the kind of drifting I do, you know, team drifting, grassroots drifting for fun, like party events, and competition drifting. You know, in competition drifting, you do a run, maybe two, maybe even a one more time, and then everything cools down. You're done beating on it for a little while. In the kind of driving I do, I could be on track for 30 minutes, clutch kicking every 10 seconds. And that was one of the issues I was having with the axles I was buying before. So the ones that I made, the compound is actually a little bit more flexible so that it can spring back instead of a very rigid, hard alloy that with enough heat in it, a shock will snap it.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking because I used to BMX back in the day, so there's like the same argument. I don't know how much into bicycles you are, but they make hollow axles versus solid axles, and there's like a difference between those two also in terms of like resistance to snapping or resistance to, bending and springing back.
Right, and that's the idea behind it. I guess you could think about it like if you hold a pint glass over your head and drop it on the floor, it's going to shatter. But if you hold a plastic cup over your head and drop it on the floor, nothing will happen to it.
Yeah.
Somebody might say, oh, the pint glass is stronger because its glass is harder. Yeah, it's harder, but it doesn't spring back. It doesn't handle repeated shock. So it's really all about what you're using it for.
Yeah, exactly. So will Panic Made just be doing parts, or will you be doing service? Like, do you have like a shop, or you'll be working on cars, anything like that?
I spend enough time working on my own cars, and I think everybody listening understands 30 or 40 or even 40 plus year old cars take up a lot of time. I do enjoy making parts that work for my car, and I enjoy sharing them with other people who do what I do and who need parts that will hold up to what we do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know before this, you said you listened to the 886 Preservation Society podcast, the guy who's making reproduction interior parts for the Corolla.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like really great to see people like yourself who have taken it upon themselves to make new existing parts that we don't have on the market that we sorely need right now. So like strong axles is a big thing for no matter how you're driving your car, right?
Yeah. Just because I designed them to hold up to drifting doesn't mean they're not made for everyone who has an 8.6 or a Celica Supra rear end. If you try to if you bend an axle in an 8.6, you have to take the chance on paying several $100s for something that's most likely also bent. So these are also, I want to make parts for people to restore these cars and keep them nice. Like I also, I drift the cars I have, but if I came across a mint 8.6, I don't have the heart to gut it and put a cage in it. I would do what the Preservation Society is doing and, restore the interior, make everything right. Something I would personally do myself. I'm also trying to help other people do.
Awesome. Yeah. The other thing for me, seeing a lot of and servicing a lot of these cars is there's parts of the axles that wear that people don't think about. So one thing particularly in my mind is that at the end where the splines slide into those side gears and like actually retain the axle in there, those splines can actually wear out, right? Do you know are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Of course.
Yeah.
When I was designing my axles, I had probably 10 examples of every kind of axle, and there was some variance because they're all old and they do wear down. But part of my design process is that I also get the side gears out of the differentials and measure any kind of variance between the axle and the side gear. And I'm profiling my brand new axles to make up for that kind of wear over time.
Oh, awesome.
So my new axles will actually fit a lot tighter than any used one that you would pull out.
Wow, that's very reassuring to hear because I'm sure you're familiar too. Like you said it, you can't just go out and buy a new axle right now. And all these old Corolla parts, they're all 30, 40 years old. Even if you buy a quote unquote good axle, you're still taking a gamble with that axle also.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, I'm not just designing to OEM spec. It's OEM in measurement, but the material is much more durable.
So would I be able to put Celica Supra axles in my stock GTS rear diff? Do you modify the side gears? Are you at that point yet?
I don't modify the side gears. I am currently making a spool type differential that'll allow you to use the Celica Supra axles in an 8.6 GTS housing. Now, I know that this has been done before, and there's not a whole lot of public information about it, but I should have that product available later this year.
It sounds like you're reproduction GTS axle should be able to, hold up to drift abuse. So yeah, I'm optimistic for those from what you're telling me.
Right. So I'm basically creating two different options. If you want to use a Celica Supra rear end, I make axles for that already. If you want to keep your GTS rear end and have bigger axles, I'm going to have a spool kit to make that happen. If you want to keep your differential in your A86 and you want to keep your GTS rear end, I'm going to make replacement axles that'll be able to stand up to that kind of abuse. So a lot of people want to keep their car original. Like you said earlier in the podcast, people are restoring these things. They don't want to take the rear end out and put some other bigger rear end in it. They want to keep the factory one that came with their 86. My axles will make them a stronger rear end without having to get rid of the original. That's for people who, their goal is to keep the car as original as possible or save money. Because let's be honest, a Celica Supra rear end is like $1,500 to $2,000 on the market right now. They're really hard to find. The one that's in my car, I had to buy a car to get it.
Oh man. I was just about to ask that. I know you guys have one of the highest concentrations of classic Toyota up in the Northwest, but I was going to ask, how available are Celica Supra rear ends for you guys? Because I know they're like ultra rare out here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, and traditionally the way that you made your 86 or some other old Toyota, the way you made the rear end stronger was to just get a bigger Celica Supra rear end or something similar. I'm looking at options to make stronger axles for the Hilux rear end or other F-code rear ends, maybe like the Van or the Previa. They're with some new parts being made, it's possible to use some of those too.
Yeah, there's definitely some old timers I've talked to who have pulled me aside and said hey, do you know the secret? This Toyota van or this Toyota truck, the axle will go into a Corolla.
Right. And, one of the problems with those is that you can't really buy LSDs for them. And they all share the same third member. It's a 7.5 inch. And I'm also currently making a 7.5 inch spool, which as far as I know, no one has ever made, which is very surprising to me because the old Toyota truck, the Hilux truck, is popular with off-road people too. And obviously off-road people love using spools and lockers. So yeah, that is also coming very soon. And like I said earlier, if I had more time, if the COVID thing didn't happen, I would have had these products finished before I launched my company. But we are where we are, and I can just let everyone know that they'll be here very shortly.
We talked a little bit about it on our previous phone call, but one of the biggest drivers for me to do this podcast is to help keep the culture and the spirit of these cars, of motorsports, alive for everyone. And one thing that I've asked, former competitive drifters or people who are still big into drifting in the drift scene right now is the state of drifting right now in the US and then how we can support it. So I know that's multiple questions. So what do you think is the state of drifting in the US right now?
From what I see, there's sort of a widening gap between competition drifting and grassroots drifting. The competition end of it is there's so much money involved, and the goal of winning is so much different than grassroots type driving or team driving that I can still see my competition friends over across the room and I can still wave at them, but it feels like they're getting a little further away, and I know some of those guys, they also do party events and drive, grassroots for fun, but also there are people who are strictly, I guess you could call it race car drivers at this point.
What are your views right now on grassroots versus pro drifting? And then how do those camps see each other?
Well, I used to be into competitive drifting, so I know what that world is like, and it wasn't exactly my world, which is why I do the team driving and grassroots driving that I do now. But I do understand the motivation, and I don't think there's really a difference in how people enjoy either side of it. It's just what's their motivation going in? You know, is your motivation to be the champion? Do you want to be on top? Is your motivation to have as much fun as possible, regardless of how much it costs you, or just to spend as much time as you can with your friends? And I don't think there's a clear divide between the two, because I know plenty of guys who are like pro drivers who have other cars they bring out to fun events. You know, I was just doing the Desert Meehan 3 event in Phoenix. That was in December, and like Chelsea Denofa was out there, and like Forrest Wang, and they're not there to get points. They're not getting paid to be there. They're just out there having fun with us. So I think that online, if you see how people are approaching this subject, they act like it's a lot more divided than it actually is. Of course, there are people that are like hardcore competition only, and of course, there are people who are, I'm just about drifting style and grassroots, and I'll never be a competitor. But I think the image is a lot more amplified than it actually is, and we're all out there for whatever we think the right reason is, and we're all having fun doing it.
Yeah, I feel the same way from like an outsider looking in, because I'm actually a road race guy. So I actually am one of the few guys, I would say, that has a 886 and does not drift. It's pretty funny because when there's at least two of us that go to like a track day, usually we'll get some comment like someone will walk by and like, "What is this, drift day today?"
Yeah, right. Well, I think you'd be surprised if you headed up north a little bit. I know plenty of guys who they only grip race their 886s. You know, look at a place called the Ridge Motorsports Park in Shelton, Washington. They have lapping days, and I've seen lots of 86s out there.
Yeah, I think old school toy Dan like rented out a track for his birthday, and he is a road race guy, so.
Yeah, I've known Dan for several years, and you're not going to see Dan at a drift event, but he's probably having more fun than I am, because I break a lot more stuff than he does, I would guess.
Oh, man. So I'm personally a big fan of grassroots drifting. I think it really builds community. It's the barrier to entry is very low. I think there's a lot more people supportive in, new people trying to learn. The biggest attractor for me is like the variety of cars you can see out there, right? So for me, what are some holes you see in grassroots drifting? And I guess my bigger question is like, as like an outsider, what are some ways I can support grassroots drifting locally?
Just come out to events. Don't be shy. Like, one of my favorite things is giving rides to people who've never drifted before. I've had some people over the years come up to me and say, "Hey, you gave me a ride when I was 13, and now I'm 19 and I just bought an S13, and that ride inspired me to get into this and go down that road, and now I'm finally doing it myself." And also, just coming out to spectate. Showing tracks that, hey, this is a thing that people want to see, and like, let's be frank, like, they can make money off of it, so they want to have more drift events.
Yeah, I completely agree with that last statement. If there's more spectators that come out and tracks see like, hey, we can make money from events like this, events will only get more organized, better. Maybe entry fees will get lower. Like, it's good all around. And from a majority of people I talk to, it seems like this is the key: is people just need to come out to grassroots drifting events.
Yeah, and also from the organizational side, what I see in a lot of places that are just starting to have drifting in their area is the person who is passionate about it, who organizes the event and spends all their time on it, they're not track owners. They're just some guy who's into drifting who also has a job or maybe kids to take care of. So, if more people show up, then tracks will take on the responsibility of organizing the event and, getting everything together and making sure it's all safe. And, that they have the incentive to make money, but they have to see that the money's there, right? And you get an overall, like, you get a much better event when you're not having to flag the start line while the other run group goes up, which I've seen. It used to be just like autocross, where you'd have to work half the day and then drift half the day. So one of the advantages for having more spectators is that the tracks take on that responsibility. The drivers get more seat time, they learn faster, they get better faster.
You made one good point about how a lot of these people who hold drift events aren't actually like track owners or track organizers. So I know you've run Grange before, which is now Apple Valley Speedway. Do you know Andrew Goodluck in Goodluck League?
Yeah, I do know Andrew. I drove with him I went to Horse Thief Mile maybe like 2 years ago and drove with him at an event there.
Yeah.
And I had my Celica, and he was the only 8.6. It was pretty fun. So naturally, I was like, hey, man, we need to drive together, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I went to Grange for a Super D event. It was the first one, actually. And yeah, it was organized by the guys from Animal Style, Julian Jacobs and his team. And now I believe that I think the name has changed to Apple Valley, and maybe they're much more involved just because they see that there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, I'm not exactly familiar with the entire story, but it sounds like you're on the right track. Like the new owners of the track have put more money into it to like improve the upkeep, and I'm sure a lot of that has to do with a lot of big events that are held there now. Like, it was a big deal for Naoki to come to the U.S. and ship cars over and drive there, right?
Yeah. The first time he came over, I got invited to that event. My team got invited. We were lucky enough to be there, and I think that really showed this little racetrack out in the middle of the desert that like people will come here, and if you make it an even better experience, more people will come here. And, that sort of speaks to what's happening in places like there's a kart track in Louisiana that I heard about, and they've had just a few drift events down there, and it's also growing. And for all we know, someday there'll be a Formula D event there. We don't know. Yeah, so later this month, I will have my car at Horse Thief Mile for the Jimmy Up Matt Surrey, the third annual Jimmy Up Matt Surrey. I'll have my Celica there. It has PANIC-made parts in it. It's got PANIC wire wiring front to back. If you want to check out our products, if you want to see them in action, that's where I'll be.
Horse Thief Mile, that's Willow Springs Raceway, right?
That is, yeah.
You know Taka Ono's there? He's holding Drift School USA at that track?
I do know Taka.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys get to run into each other. The Drift School trailer and the cars are all up there, so...
Yeah, the last time I was at Horse Thief Mile was for a Just Drift round. And yeah, Taka was there. It's always nice to see him. We got to hang out a little bit. I got to see some of his students drive, which was pretty exciting. Yeah, hopefully he's there. I look forward to seeing him again.
Yeah.
I know he was on your podcast at one point. I got to listen to it. So yeah, it's always very interesting to hear his perspective. He's been around for a little while.
I was telling Grant, Battle Garage Grant, that because we had the privilege of getting to see him when we were just so happened to be at Willows. And I was like, do you know how I know Taka is still a real Corolla guy? Because he was pumped to talk about a blue top 16 valve.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you can get it done with one of those, like, you can get it done with anything.
Yeah. So Mark, we'll wrap up the podcast, but we can like talk a little bit afterwards.
See, you did that. I'm not Mark.
Oh shit!
Even you did it.
Oh man!
Even you did it.
Sorry, man.
Yeah. Now I'm feeling nice and loose. See that? Now I'm in my comfort zone. Someone mistook me for my brother. Come on.
All right, sorry,
yeah,
Matt.
I had a couple of things that maybe we could talk about. I can tell you about how I met the owner of that SR5 I ran into the other day.
Dude, okay, so yeah, at the beginning of the podcast, that's what I was trying to hold in. So when we had our phone call a couple of days ago, you said you saw this SR5 out there in the middle of Arizona where you're at now. So tell us the story about it. Did you end up being able to buy that car?
still pending. And I will tell you what happened. I was with my girlfriend. We were driving out in the desert to a lake out in Arizona, and we just happened to stop in a town to get some drinks and stuff. And going back through town, we're just driving through a neighborhood, and I look over. There's a Koki SR5 and back in someone's driveway. Of course, you know the radar is always on, right?
Yeah.
So I drive by a few times, and like I can see people looking out their windows because I'm not like someone who lives there. So we leave and go have our fun at the lake. And on the way home, it's just, I have to go back. Like, I know it's weird to just knock on people's doors these days. And especially because of like social distancing, right? And they don't know me. But yeah, I decided I'm going to go back. I'm going, 90 miles an hour on the highway in my truck, trying to get there before it gets too late. Truck runs out of gas. Great. So it's it's over 100 degrees out still. And I have to walk down the highway. And the only gas can they have at this place is a 1-gallon can. It was just like the most pathetic gas can I've ever seen. Anyway, get my gallon of gas, dump it in, get to a gas station, fill up. It's just starting to get dark, and I pull back up to the house. And I'm all ready. I got my number written down on a piece of paper in case they don't want to answer the door. So I give it a knock. And then this older lady answers the door, like very confused why like I'm knocking on her door, so some stranger. And I explained to her, like, hey, I'm really interested in that car you have in the driveway if you'd be willing to sell it. Still confused. And I start back over, apologize. Hi, my name's Matt. I'm here to talk to you about this car you have in your driveway. As soon as I introduced myself and, please and thank you a few times, she kind of warmed up to me and said, okay, yeah, please give me your number and I'll have my brother talk to you about it. So I'm currently waiting for his call. Judy, if you are listening right now, please call me. If I don't hear from her, I have her address. I'm going to mail her a letter and maybe a little money to just please at least call and talk to me about it. It was a very nice condition, Koki SR5 tube manual transmission that I would very much like to take care of myself.
Is it a coupe or a hatch?
Oh, I'm sorry. It is a coupe.
Okay. And then it's Arizona, so there's probably rust-free too.
Yeah, from what I could tell, pretty much.
Oh, man. It's funny, we talk about stories like these are so few and far between now, where it's like the owner of these cars has no idea what it is, right?
Right. And, when I first got into drifting, the 8.6 was pretty popular in the Northwest, but it was also pretty common to get one for like $500. And, they were everywhere up there. And it was, we joke about it now that you want to find the old lady car. It was very easy to find. And they're not easy to find these days. I mean, you can still buy them up there, but not for $500. So I found a unicorn out in the desert.
Those days were probably before my time, but a lot of people who have been in the Corolla scene for a long time tell me stories like this where like they'll read the classified ads in the newspaper. And one specific story I remember, this guy, Toyota Corolla GT5, and very reasonable price. I'm like, yeah, definitely those days of this person thinks it's just like everyday commuter car. The enthusiast goes up to them and they're totally bewildered, like, why are you so interested in this Corolla? I think those days are unfortunately long gone.
Well, to find that kind of thing, you have to drive 2 hours out in the middle of nowhere in 105-degree heat to find that person. They still exist, but yeah, there aren't very many of them. I hope that the whole interview comes across really well. Like in the beginning, like I said, I was kind of nervous, it was a little choppy, but you're professional. I trust you.
Oh my God, I'm not a professional. Yeah, man, you did fine. And again, I sincerely appreciate this opportunity because, like we said before, like I have followed that blue Celica since 2010 when I was on the first gen Celica forums and I had a first gen Celica, and I saw the 20 valve, I saw the beams, I was like, holy crap, beams is going in that car, so I saw the progression, and then to be able to have you on the podcast now, it's just like, it's been great, man.
Right. Thanks. And, now you know the sort of backstory before the Celica, before you ever saw my car. Like I was driving H6s and I owned them myself. And, it was really great being here. Thanks for having me.
If I'm interested in learning more about Panic Made, how can we reach you?
The best way to reach me is panicmade.com. There you can see all the products I currently offer. I have some things up about what's coming soon. You can just click to email me or find me on Instagram. It's at panicmade.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Matt. Thank you again, Matt. And what's it called?
Are you sure?
And I know you're making the trip up, so hopefully we'll be able to meet up in person in the Bay Area. But if not, man, I'd love to have you on the podcast again. If for any reason, like if you got a new product release, if you want to just talk about Corollas again, man, I'd love to just have you on the podcast again anytime.
Yeah, I'd love to do it again. And hopefully I can make it up there. I have some customers right now up in San Jose and the Bay Area. Shout out to Julian.
But yeah, thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for your time again. And then, we'll have you on again.
Great. And thanks for your time and thanks for having me.